Welcome to Smart in the City, the Babel podcast where we bring together top actors in the smart city arena, sparking dialogues and interactions around the stakeholders and themes most prevalent for today's citizens and tomorrow's generations. I am your host, Tamlin Shimizu, and I hope you will enjoy this episode and gain knowledge and connections to accelerate the change for a better urban life. Smart in the City is brought to you by Babel Smart Cities. We enable processes from research and strategy development to co-creation and implementation. To learn more about us, please visit the Babel platform at babel-smartcities.eu. So I'm excited to jump back into mobility topics. You all know probably if you know of the podcast that I love talking about mobility, urban mobility, sustainable mobility, different technological solutions with mobility. And this time we're traveling to Belgium and digging into the all-important and exciting topic of mobility as a service, otherwise known as MaaS. So with me today are two experts on the topic and two people working really directly on this topic. So they're going to share their personal experiences as well as this great use case from Brussels. So with me, first off, I have Damien Baun. He's the CEO of Trafi. Welcome, Damien.
Hello.
Lovely to have you on. So, and then next up, I have Thomas de Bosempia. He's the MaaS project manager for STIB at Floya, the MaaS app of Brussels. Welcome, Thomas.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you. So you guys are accustomed to working with each other. So I'm really interested to hear both sides of your perspectives on this very interesting project in Brussels. But before we get started, I like to start off with a little teaser to get us warmed up and in the mood for some nice questions. So the teaser today I brought for you is: imagine life in Brussels in 2050. What do you think will be the main mode of public transportation in Brussels? And feel free to let your imagination run wild. Maybe, Thomas, you want to start with this one as you're the one based in Brussels.
There won't be any need for vehicles. Teletransportation will be the most effective way to move around. Now, more seriously, hopefully we will see the rise of drones, maybe to some extent, but for sure autonomous vehicles will be deployed at a large scale, I believe.
Yeah. What do you think, Damien?
Yeah, the sort of main mode of transport is always a tough one because, of course, people have different needs, and what could be the main mode for one person might be a sort of edge case for another. And so actually I have a hope that our cities are complex and multimodal, and what we actually optimize for more is coverage. That wherever you are in the city, there's a mode of transport that can get you efficiently using the constrained resource of the city streets to anywhere else in the city. And that probably will mean some kind of close to personal mobility at the edges, which could be scooters, bikes, autonomous pods, bringing you into high speed, high capacity trunk networks to get people across the city. Geography doesn't really work of having every A to every B in personal pods. So I believe it probably needs a sort of well-connected network. So if so, to take your question literally, and I'm an engineer by training, so forgive me for that. But if you were to sort of add up the number of journey kilometers by mode, in a period, I expect you'd say the main mode will be the metro, carrying large numbers of people across the city. But if you were to measure it instead by how many different modes an individual uses, it'll be much less clear which is the main or dominant mode.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that cars will still have a place?
Private cars?
Yes.
Or cars as, is an autonomous pod owned by a third party car or not. I think it comes into very interesting questions of what is public transport and what's private transport. Is Uber public transport or not? And if it's not, then is that because of who owns the shares in it? Because if it's what about an Uber pool? Is that public transport? What about a DRT minibus with only 2 people on it? Is that public transport? So this line is very blurred. That's getting a long way from your question about will cars have a space. I suspect that we will find they'll be priced out of our cities. It seems to me inevitable that when you have a society, a wealthy, successful society like Brussels is, then most people who would like a car could afford one, or their company helps them pay for one. Therefore, we need to find ways of helping them make better choices to not just use it because it's outside their house, because if everyone did that, our city grinds to a halt. And so we have to find methods to convince people to take alternative modes that make better use of the network. And I suspect that means pricing private cars off the road for most journeys using some kind of per journey based on congestion road user pricing scheme. So not banned. That feels like not our European way of saying, lots of pedestrianized streets, I hope, because that makes a great living experience, but on other streets, making people think very seriously. For this journey, a private car is exactly the right thing. I've got loads of bags. I've got to pick up somebody who's, has difficulty walking. I'm carrying on this journey beyond the city to someone else afterwards. But I hope in a much smaller percentage of journeys are carried out in privately owned cars than are today, I suppose.
Okay, yeah, great. So before we dig more into this topic, I want to get more of your thoughts on all of this. But before that, I think it'd be really interesting for us to dive a bit into your backgrounds. Let the listeners know about who you are. Where did you come from? How did you get here today? What is really your background? Maybe Thomas, you want to start?
Sure. I have so I'm not an engineer, as Damien just mentioned. I'm more into business. I have a master's degree in business administration, and I have 15 years professional experience leading major digital transformation programs and IT tools deployments and implementation in various sectors. So I worked in very large companies in the automotive sector. I did run a startup for a few years that was active in urban logistics, and I'm now part of a consulting firm leading the mobility practice. So I've always tried to stay close to mobility and urban challenges, and I've worked for the past 2.5 years now for STIB, leading the MaaS program and deploying the Floya app as you know it. Just wanted to jump back to what Damien was saying. I think it's indeed very interesting, and private car ownership is probably the element that we want to focus on. I think we will shift from ownership to probably usage, depending on the destination and on the reason for the journey, and that's for persons, obviously. But then you also have the challenge around urban logistics and how you move around goods, which is something that is going to evolve a lot, but cars will probably not completely disappear, although technology will have them evolve in a different form as they are today. But probably that people will still use cars to go in between cities or to go to the suburbs, and so it will all depend on the reason for your journey, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump more into these topics, Damien, I want to hear from you. What is your background? Where did you come from? Tell us more.
Not from a transport background, actually. More by accident, I ended up in transport. I spent the first part of my career. I'm a mechanical engineer. I worked actually in the automotive industry. May surprise you to hear. And then by accident, I did an MBA myself as well, and came out in about 2000 this will give you some view on how much to trust my predictions of the future. I looked at the world and where I was going to start a business and felt that all the fortunes that were going to be made on the internet had been made already. And therefore I had to do something else. And just as the very first mobile internet phones were coming out, there was a technology called WAP at the time. And I managed to sort of get hold of one of these very early pre-release Nokia WAP phones and play around with it. And think about what it might be good for. And the technology, the bandwidth was very slow. The screens were tiny, very few pixels on each one, but came to the conclusion that one of the few things you could actually usefully do with it was to do a journey plan. It's something you needed to do on the move, where there was a simple text-based question and a text-based answer. So I built a rail journey planner for the UK on a Nokia WAP phone in 1999, and I believe, so though maybe one of your listeners will correct me, that it was the world's first ever journey planner on a phone.
Yeah, thanks so much for that interesting background. So Thomas, maybe you can tell us, what is Floya? What does it do? Or what does it look like?
Well, Floya is, as you said, a mobility as a service app. So it's a phone app available on both Android and iOS. Basically, centralizing all mobility services in one single app. So the idea is to ease the access to all the mobility services for the users. It's based on a journey planner, as Damien just mentioned. So the idea is to allow the user to make better choices, to show him all the alternatives there are. So basically he enters a destination and the app will tell him, okay, you have various options to go to that destination using different modes of transportation, being public transportation, mass transit, or private operators. So shared mobility such as bikes, step scooters, mopeds, shared cars. Taxi services. So the idea is really to have an all-in-one one-stop shopping, if you want, app of mobility. It was very important for us to go, let's say, all the way. So we tried to have only deep integrations. So basically the user can actually pay for his journey and for the vehicle that he will be using directly in the app, allowing for the user not to have to switch from one app to the other to actually purchase the trip that he's going to start. And it's, well, the MaaS app has been, so it's a public initiative. It has been developed by STIB, but it was mandated by the regional authorities of Brussels. And it's part of a much larger initiative that is called Good Move, which objective is to actually operate a modal shift from private car usage to alternative modes of transportation. And so that's one of the tools that has been deployed in Brussels to try and facilitate that shift.
Yeah, absolutely. I just have a follow-up question to that as well. So you've been implementing Floya. It's live out there. I anticipate that there were probably a lot of hurdles along the way. Can you speak maybe to some of those most significant hurdles you faced and how you overcame them? What were your lessons learned? Yeah.
Well, it was a how do you say, long haul journey. So basically, it started in 2019. I wasn't even there yet. STIB started with deploying a pilot app with another technology than Trafi, actually, that came out for about a year and a half, 2 years. Obviously, COVID didn't help because it was released in 2020, but it allowed STIB to collect a lot of insights and a lot of let's say experiences on how to on what were the customer needs and what were the technical challenges that we were about to face, and then we started working with Trafi early stages of 2022. Obviously, the biggest challenge is the technical challenge behind deep integration. So you have to address to a number of private and public operators. We do have 4 different public transport operators in Brussels. So there's a train operator, the Brussels Regional Transport operator, which operates metros, trams, and buses. But then you have 2 other regional bus operators who come into Brussels. And then all the private operators. So you have to discuss with them. You have to build the contractual collaboration, and then the contractual, how do you say, the contractual relationship, and then only can you start building the integration. Obviously, Trafi helped us a lot because they have a extensive experience in building such integrations. Nevertheless, you have to convince these people that it's in their interest to be part of a MaaS. So all the operators are not always interested in being part of the adventure. So there's a lot of
how do you convince them? Sorry to interrupt, but how do you convince them? Do you have any tips there? Because I see that being many cities are listening, or transport authorities, etc., and they're saying, okay, this bringing all the people together is probably the biggest challenge. What tips do either one of you have there?
I think there are 2 elements. There's one element, obviously, is putting in place legal constraints, obliging them to be part of a public MaaS, typically, and that's is not yet the case in Brussels, but it may be in the future, and it's certainly something that we try to push. So there's a lot of nudging as well. Public authorities are pushing them to collaborate as much as possible, and then you have the ones who understood that they're part of a mobility ecosystem in a city, that they're not the only ones operating, and that it's in their interest to actually collaborate. They understand that there are potentially complementary to the public transport network to do the first and last mile of a journey, and in that sense, it's in their interest to be directly integrated in an app that will offer you the full end-to-end view of a journey, at least for the user. The other thing is it's at very low cost for them. So basically, we've been financing big chunk of the integration part, although they have to finance their end of the integration. Nevertheless, I mean, we just show and make their services available to the users of the Floya app. We don't take any commission, or we don't take any markup on their pricing. So it's different types of ways to convince them. I think another element that I've discussed very recently with an operator. There's also a tendency to, you have the first runners, and then you have the followers. And I think a very interesting thing we see on the market now is that now that we've launched the app, that we have several operators on board, all the others are asking to be on board as well and want to be in as quickly as possible. If you go even further, we're discussing with various ride-hailing companies, and basically they're saying we want to be the first ones in, not our competitor, and that's a very, very interesting element to observe, because a year and a half ago we tried to discuss with them and they were saying no way, we will not integrate. So it's a very quick change in behavior, basically.
Yeah. I think Thomas's comments there match our experience, both obviously observations in Brussels, but also elsewhere, is that there has been a shift. Your question about how do you convince them to participate and cooperate was a very frequent and relevant question a few years ago, because you're absolutely right. There was a sort of pushback from the MSPs about who owns the user, these kind of discussions. Why should I cooperate? These were all companies funded by, zero interest VC investments, where it was all about growing the size of your user base. I think now there is a much more mature cooperative relationship being built between the cities, who, after all, provide the infrastructure and streets and pavements and power supplies and everything else that these vehicles run on, and the operators themselves. And I sense that this, as Thomas was saying, over the last couple of years has moved on a long way. And I still hear concern from cities, the same question you asked. How do we get them to cooperate? And my suggestion now is just get in touch. I think you'll be surprised. I think you'll find most of them are very ready to have that conversation now. And exactly on that point, put up a sense of shortage of actually there's only space for 3 who's going to be the launch MSPs, and you might find you get a queue of them all wanting to be in that launch group.
It's a funny phenomenon, right? That we have in many things in our system, in our life. Yeah, exactly. Damien, I want to ask you also, you mentioned this, I think you mentioned before, this kind of sustainability aspect. And I'm wondering what you view as the role of MaaS platforms like Floya in sustainable urban transportation, and how are these kind of ideas implemented in practice?
I think they are certainly an important part, but an app, and this is going to sound odd to you as a company that markets itself as a supplier of MaaS systems. I see us as a supplier of sort of excellent journey information tools, helping people make better travel decisions. And having shared a bit of my background before Trafi, I see the current generation of journey planning, finding the fares, being able to book and ride as being a sort of natural evolution of that 20-year trajectory, which started with just a journey planner that became a real-time journey planner, that became a real-time journey planner with incidents. And then you added fares, and then you added the ability to purchase, and then you added multimodal journeys. And the name MaaS has been attached to this sort of gradual evolution that's been going on over 25 years now, 24 years I think, and will keep going. And the brand MaaS on it has been excellent in getting interest for the sector. But I think the sector has just been trucking on and evolving and improving and becoming more comprehensive and better at doing this modal shift piece we're talking about. Every year it's got better. The bar has risen, driven by people like Google Maps and these kind of companies who do an excellent product for free. And something that we talk a lot about with STIB is that if you're not targeting your product to be at least as good as those free to use products from the likes of Google, then why is anyone going to choose to use your product instead? So it's a very high bar, but you have to keep chasing. So on the question of sustainability, I don't see that a MaaS app or a journey planning app alone can do it. A city with one bus route doesn't need a complicated tool to help people choose which journey to take. As cities become more complex and more multimodal, I refer you back to my vision of what the 2050 city looks like. Complex multimodals, far too complex for the average human brain to be able to compute the best route through it. The more you need tools to assist. But the tools themselves are useless without the comprehensive network of excellent, reliable, clean, well-priced public transport backbone with all the complementary feeder services feeding into it, whether they be taxis, scooters, bikes, car clubs. So I see its role as being. I sometimes think of it a bit like you can't imagine a cinema chain seeing different movies every night at different times where you have to book a seat. You can't imagine them questioning why they need a website to tell people when the film is. If you don't tell people when the film is and what time it starts and ends and let them book a seat on it, then you're going to have empty seats in your cinema. You wouldn't stop and question why you need some kind of marketing tool. And yet, for some reason, we question whether cities need a MaaS app. And how it should pay for itself, etc. Does anyone in a cinema chain ever look at their website and say, do you know what? We should probably get rid of that because it's costing us to run a website. It's like if you want a product which is complex to use and there's what you call a wasting asset, to use an economics term. Once that seat on a bus gets to the end of the bus and route and turns around and no one's in it, you can't sell it again. You've lost that revenue opportunity in the journey. And you need to fill it at the time it's available. And to do that, you need excellent decision-making tools. And that's, I think, the role of our product and the role of Thomas's team and project at the company is to help people make better journey decisions using the assets available. I can see Thomas wants to.
Yeah, I just want to jump on what you just said about tools, widespread tools like Google Maps. Obviously, people are used to using such tools. They're actually not completely free because they come with a price. I mean, people are ready to pay that price, but basically Google uses the data that are generated by the usage of Google Maps, and everyone is aware of that. And there's a lot of applications behind. This is obviously a huge challenge for us. It's to convince users that we actually do have a USP compared to Google Maps. We actually go beyond. We do offer the possibility to pay in-app and to have a local view. Also, we position ourselves as a public product, as best in class in terms of GDPR regulation, in terms of consent management, in terms of accessibility, which is obviously a very important topic. And all these elements put one behind the other shows that there is probably some space for tools like ours. But I agree with Damien, it's quite a big of a challenge to make sure that you do have an added value compared to what people are used to using every day and have been used to using for the past 15 years now.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that. That was actually going to be my devil's advocate question on why not just use Google, right? To follow up. So I think you already answered that perfectly, though, on the added benefit. I wanted you touched before on this kind of investment and the business model behind it, and I think that's really interesting to talk about in this context as well. So MaaS platforms require this significant investment, I think, and time, right, to be sustainable and to work well. So how does STIB envision this financial model, or what is already working for you? Can you tell me more about that?
First of all, I think we need to put it in the right context. STIB is a public company offering a public service, and the first goal of this whole project is not to have a financial revenue out of it. It's first and foremost to offer a public service and to make access to various modes of mobility much easier. As Damien mentioned, mobility is becoming increasingly complex in our cities, and offering a public service to actually bring that variety of mobility to the user is very important. It's actually something we've been working on in parallel as well, is to have the legal framework behind Evolve so this whole MaaS is now recognized as part of the public service contract STIB has. So it is an obligation now for STIB to offer a MaaS service in Brussels. So that's one part of the answer. Now, obviously, if you can generate some revenue, it's and have a business case, it's obviously even more interesting. But what we've seen in the past 5-10 years is that all the companies who have tried to offer Google Maps like type of applications moved from a B2C to a B2B model, because there is, as such, no real business model. the travelers are not ready to pay a markup to use a MaaS application. So basically, you will never be able to have a real business model on what you're selling. So that's the first element. Obviously, if you can manage with your MaaS app to drive more people to use your public transport, then that's one way of seeing a business model. You generate more revenue, you generate more people who actually purchase your tickets, so you generate more traffic to your network, and that's something that is very interesting for us. And we are looking into other possibilities to develop business cases or business models in the future, being, for example, offering B2B functionalities and so on to try and convince companies to push their employees to shift from the car to using other types of transport. But it's not a real direct business model which will generate revenue. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, absolutely. I think that there's, you serve a good point, right? That public companies are not there to make money, right? They're there to serve the public. I think more and more we're looking at business models of also cities in our work that we're doing as Babel as well. So that's why it's just an interesting question to see how different cities are addressing this and seeing if there are business models behind some of these applications. Maybe also another question to both of you, and I want to ask about accessibility, because I think we always have to keep that in mind in anything that we do. Well, in general, in the public space, but especially with mobility, I think as well. There's a risk, of course. Is the MaaS application serving low income and disabled passengers? Maybe one of you or both of you can address this on how you're seeing this play out with the MaaS applications.
Yeah, I see it as a real challenge, and it's a fascinating question, because it brings with it the conflict between what the public sector has to do in its obligation to serve all its citizens. It can't just cherry pick the easy citizens to work with in the way that a private business could do, aiming at one particular social group. On the other hand, innovation, in my view, happens best where you start with, I think Thomas used the word earlier about early adopters, where you start with a not fully mature or excellent product, but you serve a small group of community of people who are the most forgiving of your product quality, but most interested in trying out new things. And they give you feedback, and you learn from the way they're using the product, and you make it better. And with time, you then start to serve a larger and larger audience. Or you might, for example, say, the objective of this app is that we're going to get people to shift, to do what I did, to get rid of their private car and to start using shared mobility instead. And if you're trying to do that, the best way to do it, I would suggest, is that you take a 500 meter by 500 meter block in a city, and you say, we're going to make sure that people who live inside this block have excellent access to buses, bikes, scooters, car clubs will be on every street. We're going to make sure there are parking bays for them. We're going to help these people become early adopters of it. And then when they start to adopt this product and tell their neighbors that this is a great way to live, you don't need a car anymore, you will then start to be able to push the boundaries out of that region. So you make something excellently well suited by the modes of transport or the app to one geographical region or to one demographic group, and then you broaden it. So the excellent and broaden with two different groups there, one geographic, one demographic. The public sector has a real struggle with that, because even though that might be the best way to innovate new ventures and products and ideas, it's almost impossible for a government-funded project to drop in and say, we're just serving the technically enabled 30-year-olds with their top-end smartphones who live in this area. If everyone would quite rightly, I'm a taxpayer too, be up in arms. So juggling that is a very difficult, sensitive topic. And I think we need to be doing our best to make sure that our apps are compliant with all the very stringent regulations for in Europe these days for readability of apps, for legibility, for use for all sorts of social groups. But I think you have to recognize that a lot of what we're talking about on this call, a lot of what is MaaS, has been enabled by new technology. So to sort of hold the industry accountable to say, you also have to be able to offer all those same benefits to people who decided or for whatever reason they can't afford, they're not physically able to use the new technology, is sort of an unachievable aim when these things only work because of the technology. Let's look at something like an Uber app. The fact that the app sort of knows where you are and is tracking you and are you where you're supposed to be. Maybe, Uber's a bad example, but some of the things that are possible with new technologies in mobility are only possible because the user is being tracked in real time. The driver of the vehicle or the system can speak to that user in real time, can send some kind of notification to say I'm late or I'm early, to identify who you are, sending a code, giving a tip. All of these things which are deeply embedded in these new mobility solutions are almost impossible to do with a sort of call center. And that creates a real challenge of, do you want to slow down? Are you able to slow down the technological rocket ship at the front from trying new things out in a sort of pilot project way in order to serve everybody? And will that actually overall be worse for everybody in the long run because you don't evolve the great products? I don't know, Thomas. It's a bit of a hobby horse, but it's a real
Thomas' wheels are spinning. I saw them spinning. So,
I think it's a bit. I tend to. I understand Damien's position. I think it's about finding the right balance between complying with all this regulation and the fact of being or offering a public product that needs to be accessible to everyone, and actually trying to move as quickly as possible and embrace technology. And if we look at it, we decided to go live with what we called an MVP, so a minimum viable product. We knew that there were weaknesses on the product. We knew that we were addressing only part of the population. We have received a lot of criticism because of that. And now we're working hard to actually have our product evolve and answer to all the needs of different kinds of users. But we did take the strategic decision to move forward and not wait for our product to be fully compliant. Now, having said that, we do invest a lot in having the product being WCAG compliant, so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is actually a European obligation for public companies. We are, thanks to public pressures, investing a lot in enriching the app with data. So is a metro station accessible to wheelchairs or to people with reduced mobility issues? Is a vehicle accessible? Is a tram or a bus stop accessible? All these data need to be structured and made accessible through the app. It's not an easy challenge, honestly. Just having the data structured in a way that it is exploitable by an external app is a huge challenge. And we should not forget that very often technology is limited by the data it has access to. And so that's certainly one of the biggest challenges that we are facing today. But we're investing massively in having this data on board now. interesting thing to add is that Trafi offers a white label product. So we are using basically the same technology as in other cities, in Berlin and Southampton. And Trafi has deployed functionalities that we are not using yet. Typically, you're able to ask for a step-free ride. So people with disabilities could say, I want to go from A to B, but you have to take into account that I cannot use steps, or I need to go through certain types of transport. So basically the functionality exists. We could use it, but we don't have the data today. So it's always trying to find this balance on, okay, we are deploying the product, we are advancing, we know that there are weaknesses, and we will enrich it along the way.
Yeah, really, really good words there on finding this balance. I would love to talk more about this topic with you, but unfortunately we do have to move on. We're almost out of time. So for that, I'm moving on to one of our fun segments. And the segment that I've chosen for you today is called Flip the Script. Flip the script. You are the one asking the questions, and I'll be the one answering them. And when I have a single guest, it means that they get to ask me questions. But the good thing about this segment, when I have two guests, it means that you get to ask each other a question. So you get to think about a question that you think that the other person would be, you really want them to answer. You really want to give them, have them give this perspective, or it should be a question that you really want to know of them. So do you have a question for each other? Whoever wants to start?
Fun for you, maybe. I'm not sure it's fun for us. You're asking me to put my precious client on the spot here, Tamlin.
It doesn't have to be a critical question, right? It can also be a fun question. You can ask him, where are you going on holidays? It can be any question, right?
Go ahead, Damien, shoot.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, I don't do the fun questions. Sorry, apologies for that. It's going to be one in the domain. I think one of the challenges that face our sector, and we often get asked about, is this question about roaming, and is the future of MaaS people having sort of different apps for different cities, or different apps for their own city, and then a general app for everywhere else. So maybe that's the role of the Googles of this world, is that when you're going to another city, you use Google, but when you're in your own city, you're like a sort of a prosumer, or a keen photographer who might have a different app on their phone for taking photographs than, even though there is an Apple, let's say, camera app, maybe you want to use a better one that gives you more controls. And I think of perhaps users in their own city as being like sort of professional users of apps, where they want access. They want a whole level of, they don't want to just know, can I get from A to B? They want to know absolutely what's the best way, bearing in mind the disruption and that roadworks there today. So the question is how Thomas, how STIB sees the future evolving of an app like Floyer, either expanding across greater regions or sharing infrastructure or data with neighboring cities and regions, so that users didn't have to re-register every time they download another one, or not?
It's a very, very interesting question. Obviously, everyone has probably this question in mind. We are discussing and exchanging experiences with various cities. I've been talking to probably tens of cities around Europe in the past few months. But I think the biggest challenge is more on the short and midterm. How do we make sure our product is a success? If you look in the longer term, we already have a challenge in Belgium to face is to say, okay, you may or may not know that Belgium is a bit politically constructed in a politically complicated way. We have regions that are completely autonomous, that have their own transport network and the transport system. We've been deploying FLOIA in the Brussels region. We're not technically allowed to go into and to expand into Flanders and Wallonia. But we are speaking to Delane and Tech, who are the two other operators. We are speaking to SNCB and MBS, who is the train operator, and we all really believe that it would be in the interest of the user to have one single app covering Belgium. That's the first step. And then you will probably want to have one single app covering a wider geographical area. But as Damien said, that would probably be Google Maps. I don't have the answer to that question, but it is a topic that everyone is looking into. You could think of roaming, as you said. You could think of sharing data. You could think of, who would have thought in the early 2000s that you would be able to use your phone and use data everywhere around Europe at the same price as in your own country? It was unthinkable back then, yet reality shows today that roaming is a reality. So I think it's the biggest challenge is standardization of data and political will. I think collaboration between cities will come with regulation and with a real political will to actually harmonize the way we approach all this sector.
Yeah, complicated but good question. Yeah, very good. Now, do you have a question for Damien?
I do have a question for Damien. And it's actually an interested question. We use, as I said, a white label product. Obviously, the more customers Trafi has, the more the biggest the chance we have that others will invest in functionalities that we will be able to benefit from and lower our development costs, or at least that's the way Damien has sold it to us. But I strongly believe it is the case. So we are obviously pushing for other cities to embrace this product, and we do believe that it's a very good product, by the way. But my question would be, if you had infinite funding and development capacity, what would the ideal MaaS product be for you? If you were the Google of tomorrow, how would your MaaS product look like?
Also a very good question.
Yeah, thank you. I love the idea of infinite resources. That's not offer I get every day. And thanks for the kind words about the Trafi platform. It's sort of, I sometimes feel like this is sort of almost lapse of the board. That the first one is sort of, can you make a journey planner work? Can you make a multimodal journey planner work? And you get around and there's a sort of yes, and then there's another problem presented. And it feels like with FLOIA, we've sort of demonstrated to the world or anyone who's interested that you can build an app that gives you multimodal journey results and allows you to book and ride multiple services all through that single account. That was something that, rather like your question you asked about, would MSPs cooperate? The next one was, even if they do, can you make a user experience that makes it seamless to go into an app and you walk up to a scooter, a bike, go on the metro, any of these modes, and you can use this one app to do it. And I think you can sort of tick the box there. So I see the next big challenge, the next thing that needs to be worked on is, and this is what would take the infinite resources, is much more development of the sort of pricing model on the top. How a city can use this tool to help encourage people to make better decisions by bundling modes together, by recognizing that, you're coming up with, some would call it gamification, but coming up with models for how you price it, which are more effective than the simple, we charge you a fixed price for a journey? How can you use a tool like this to encourage, make for a school child taking a bus to school at school travel times cheaper than at other times of day? To use these tools so that, for people who are looking for a job and are on benefits, to say, I want to go and do a job interview. And this tool can be a tool that you use to let that travel be free at a certain time of day to go on that particular trip. So much more fine-grained incentives, rewards for people based on the carbon emissions that they generate. So you give everybody so many kilograms of free travel in the city every year, or a subscription to this many kilograms, which means if you use it all up in a expensive taxi ride, in a gas guzzling taxi, you don't get very much for it. But if you use it on rental bikes, you could get an awful lot of travel from it. So trying to use the fact that we've got a platform that's connected to payment and that's understanding your individual journeys and can release access to a mode, because that's what a ticket is these days. A ticket is no longer a sort of piece of paper. It's a bit like think of it a bit like like an office access entry key card. You tap it on something. Can I go in or not? And people in different authorities in a company can get into different rooms. A sort of modern ticketing system is a bit like that. It's basically you're saying, I'm this individual. Do I have the rights to get onto this mode now or not? And I think that's where I would see this product going, is allowing cities to have that much more fine-grained, personalized tools to give people incentives, nudges in terms of cost or free benefits to make better travel choices. So there's the sort of stick of congestion charging I see as very likely. I talked about that at the very start, of people having charged for making use of scarce resource. So that's the stick. And on the other side, you have the carrot, which is these incentives to make better choices. And that's where I think these tools should develop. And that's what's so different. That's why if anyone wants to ask a question, why not just let people use Google Maps, is that once you do that, you remove all the opportunity for the city to have the ability to introduce those kind of carrots I was just describing.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think next time I'll just stay out of the conversation and you guys can just ask each other questions, because you do a wonderful job with that. No, but I have one more question for you, and it's the question I ask every single guest. And I would advise to be concise with your answer, because I think this definition is hard. So the question is, to you, what is a smart city? Who would like to start? Thomas?
You're pointing at me. For me, what is a smart city? It is a city that tends to try and improve quality of life within the city by offering, more agile, efficient, cost-effective services through technology, and that can be in various domains. The idea is to make the city more livable, greener in terms of energy consumption, in terms of mobility, in terms of waste management, in terms of infrastructure, public space usage, in terms of public services, access to public services, etc., etc. That's how I see a smart city.
Good. Yeah, perfect. Now, maybe, Damien, you have something to elaborate on his definition?
Yeah, I think Thomas is talking about a smart city as a property of the city, about its sort of geography or its assets and its infrastructure. And I'd like to have a go at defining a smart city as a behavior rather than a geography. And the behavior is that it's a city that has defined clear objectives about what it would like. Those objectives might be around congestion, it might be around emissions, it might be around average, how long it takes people, or what's the average speed of traversing the city. There could be all sorts of objectives they set, and then that same city has to monitor technology very closely, filter out so that technologies that offer the potential to help deliver against that objective get trialed, get tested, small pilots, to see whether they live up to that promise, quickly killed if they don't, but continually someone who's got their eyes open, who understands what the objectives are for the city, that the mayor has set, that the taxpayer, the voter has set, and then is monitoring technologies and not making huge bets on any one or another, but small bets to test things out. And the ones that appear to show promise or work, expanding those pilots, growing them, building them, developing them, and iterating. So the smart city is a behavior of knowing what your objectives are, monitoring technology and seeing what works for you and what doesn't, and continually evolving. And because what is smart in one city, it may not be smart for another because of all sorts of whatever your objectives are. So it's a behavior rather than a geography.
Very interesting perspective. I like it. It's always a great question to see the way that people are thinking about these types of kind of complex topics, and complex descriptions of what we're doing here in cities. So thank you both so much. That's all I have for you today. I really appreciate both of your times. I think it was a really lively conversation, and I really enjoyed learning from both of you. So thank you so much for coming on.
That was great fun. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Tamlin and Damien. It was an interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
Wasn't it, Thomas? We'll continue it over a beer later.
Yeah, there you go. Am I invited?
Please.
Okay, perfect. And also thank you to all of our listeners. Don't forget, you can always create a free account on baba-smartcities.eu. You can find out more about smart city projects, solutions, and implementations. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening. I'll see you at the next stop on the journey to a better urban life.